Now, if somebody is interested in this, how do they get educated to the point to be able to, well, first of all, as I've been told many a time, that if you really want to get into ballooning and learn, well, buy a balloon, because there are very few out there to be rented for training purposes. But how does somebody get educated in regards to entering this particular hobby?
You know, there's a few ways to do that. I would say the first thing you should do is contact a local balloonist, or maybe even several. You can usually find them in the yellow pages. There are some companies there that, they sell balloon rides, and through that network you can find people that maybe fly for fun. Get involved, find out if it's for you. Crew, help out, experience it, maybe get a flight or two, and find out if it's really what you want to do. If that's the case, then you need to go get training. And there are two approaches to that. You can go to a flight school, of which there are a handful around the country. Set aside maybe a 10-day block, come to Albuquerque, for example, get your training done in a short period of time, then go back home. The other way to do it is a little bit more drawn out, but it's to learn in your own backyard with a local pilot. Many of us are also instructors, and so we're glad to instruct in either our equipment or somebody else's equipment and learn in your own backyard.
In the conventional aviation world, we're used to the fact that our machines are certified according to a certain standard and so forth. How do you deal with producing a product and getting it past the FAA?
All the same aviation regulations apply. So it is a fully type certificated aircraft. It has to have an annual inspection. We as a manufacturer have to meet all the requirements of the FAA. So even though it's a simple process and a very simple aircraft, we have to go through the same quality control systems. And once you own it, treat it just like any other aircraft. Annual inspection, pre-flight inspections, you want to make sure that it's ready to fly.
Well, what are some of the maintenance aspects of owning and operating a balloon? What are you looking for outside of the fact that don't burn it up?
At an annual inspection, we will inspect, every square inch of fabric. We'll look for holes, look for any stitching that's been caught or snagged, any abrasions. We'll check the operating temperatures of the aircraft, because there's some little telltales that record that. We'll inspect the tanks, we'll inspect the burners, we'll strip them down actually and lubricate everything. So there's a long checklist of things that have to be done. None of them are terribly high tech, but they have to be done in accordance with the guidance.
You bring up an interesting point. How is a balloon instrumented?
We have an altimeter, vertical speed indicator, and a temperature sensor called a pyrometer, and that measures the temperature near the top of the balloon. That's critical for two things. One, it gives us an indication of how much lift we are or think we should be generating, and also because we have a temperature limit on the fabric. So it allows us not to exceed those limits.
The beauty of the Release 9 system architecture is that you have two fully redundant integrated flight displays. Each has access to all the systems and data. Providing full redundancy and eliminating traditional reversionary modes, Release 9 allows either display to be configured as the PFD. Now your failure modes are much more manageable because you can continue to fly with the same familiar display symbology without the need to relearn composite modes you don't typically fly with. Avidyne's Integra Release 9 is truly the next generation in fully integrated flight deck technology.
And what happens if you do exceed the limits? Does that require an immediate inspection?
No, typically not. Unless you go extremely high, which is very rare. But no, it reduces the life of the aircraft. It's fabric. So over time, with exposure to UV and heat and to abrasion, normal wear and tear, it will weaken over time. And so one of the things we test for every annual is we actually test the strength of the fabric. We have a little pull tester. We'll test every color in various places in the envelope, make sure it's got an adequate margin of strength to continue to operate for the next 100 hours or 12 months. And so over-temping reduces the overall life, but there's no immediate threat.
What kind of materials are in vogue in regards to the balloon envelopes themselves?
Most of the balloon is made of a ripstop nylon. In our case, it's made specifically to our specifications. It's coated, it's treated, it's dyed, so it's in all these bright, colorful colors. But it's there to be strong, and it's there to not let any air through it. We want it to be totally non-porous. 90% of the balloon is nylon. The area just around the mouth of the balloon, which is closest to the burner, is made out of Nomex, which we all know is a fire retardant material. But that's it.
Interesting. And I would assume the basic care and feeding when it's not flying is keep it dry, keep it clean, and keep it out of sight.
Yeah, we pack it away into a large bag, and we want to store that preferably not in a trailer because trailers get very hot. but store it indoors in a garage, keep it off the ground so it doesn't get damp, and that's it. It's low maintenance.
Interesting. Now, you use propane per se as a quote-unquote fuel. How difficult is that to handle? What do you need to know about propane so as not to get burned?
Well, you're absolutely right. We use LPG, liquid propane gas, and we actually draw the liquid out of the tanks. You know, in a barbecue grill, we're taking the vapor off the top. Here, we're using the liquid, and we're vaporizing it in the coils that are at the top of the burner. But it's basic common sense. You know, propane, when it expands, it's very cold, so we don't get exposed to it on our skin. We want to have all the sources of ignition under our control. And, you know, in the valves themselves have check valves in them, so even if you disconnected a hose with the valve on, you're not going to get a leak. So it's straightforward.
Freedom through control. Cirrus has completely reinvented the personal aircraft and the entire experience of owning a personal aircraft. It's a bold new take on private aviation that we call Cirrus Flying 2.0. You set the schedule. You chart the course. You're in control.
Is there any nuance to operating the burner itself? I can imagine you could do a fair amount of damage with one of those things.
A lot of the burners here, a lot of the balloons here have double burners, and each burner puts out about 18 million BTUs, so it's a lot of heat. But it's a nuance, it's a timing thing. Operating the burner itself is very simple. When you need to operate it, that's the art. And so it's always thinking ahead of yourself. You know, when we add heat, it's about 8 to 10 seconds before that actually generates lift. So we're always thinking ahead of ourselves when we're flying.
And finally, Cameron is as iconic to this industry as Piper was to the Cub, and that's a great place to be, obviously. But how do you see your position as an industry leader in helping mold the future of the sport and the industry?
Well, I think part of our job is to make sure that the technology continues to progress. You know, it's a very simple aircraft, and it's hard to reinvent the wheel. But we look at, you know, making everything more and more reliable, making it better value, more long-lasting, making it easier to control, making it more ergonomic. And I think our role is to do that and to facilitate new pilots' training and getting into the sport.